I thought about this video a little bit. Hadn't worked with the 350 series for a while, and you know, and there's a lot of guys online that are doing the 346 blends. I did one of those a while back on video, and really taking them to the extreme. And of course, that takes time, money, in some cases machine tools. So I figured I was going to take a slightly different approach. If we want to cut cylinders and make pop-ups and all that, that's coming. That'll be a different video. But what if you don't have that kind of equipment? What if you really just want to take a saw and make it run a little bit better, have fun on a Sunday afternoon exploring your hobby? That's how we started our series. You know, simple tools, simple modifications. This video here is in line with that theme. And what it is a guy has a 345 and he wants to make enough power to pull a 3/8 chain. Now that's a whole nother discussion, and I'm not able to convince him that 325 is a better deal for a 350 series saw, but that's going to be another focus, chains for the small saws. The 345 has one of these cylinders. You know, it's a true clamshell. And what I mean by that, it's got a plastic injection molded bottom. And one half the crankshaft actually sets in that plastic. And the other is captured by the bottom part of the cylinder. So basically the cylinder and the top half of the bearing holding surface, so the bearing cap, is one casting. Well, that makes it really tough to do one of the most significant types of modifications, and that is changing compression ratios. So in order to both discuss the project and talk about the parameters of the project, I need to go back and do a little review on 350s and that family of saws. The focus of this video is strictly the plastic case ones, not the 353s and 346s. You have an older 350 that has a style cylinder like this, you know, the open port or finger ported type cylinder. What do? Can you make it worth an afternoon's work? And my feeling is you sure can, and you can do quite a bit with them. And you can have a lot of fun doing it, and that's really the focus. So what I'm going to do is just review some of the differences yet again, in this series of saws that you're going to run into, and then build that saw into a better than 345 running saw. And you can replicate this for less than $100 easily, tools included. And well, one exception possibly. First, to some of the differences. This is a review. I've done this a variety of times, but there's a whole bunch of different iterations, and Bob ought to do a saw college on this. But a couple of the major things you're going to find are things like the 340 and 345 cylinder bearing cap casting versus the 350, where you have a separate bearing cap and separate cylinder. That's a significant difference. And also, the earlier 350s have the finger port or open port cylinder versus the later 350s that have the closed port with the caps on the transfers. That's the distinguishing feature right there. There's some other significant changes too. You notice there's a difference in the pull start. You know, it's a spring assist pull start versus the much thinner standard 350s. Also, the 345s had a plastic handle. This one still has the plastic handle. It hasn't broken yet, so it's adequate. The 350s have an aluminum handle. You know, is it worth the upgrade? I don't know. To some it will be. Another significant difference is The later ones had these purging systems right here with a little squeeze ball. The earlier ones did not. Well, the net result of that is there's a different intake setup. The manifold is different. That's a later version. Somewhere around here, I've got an early version. This is the earlier version. And notice the part of the plastic over here which surrounds the adjustment screws. So that's obviously not going to work with one of these saws. Completely different. You notice it has that block around the carburetor. And there's carburetor differences as well. But those are some of the things you got to work around. Well, in this case, all that intake stuff retros to pretty much all the different cylinders, because this section of the cylinder is the same regardless of what vintage saw it is. And that makes it easier. And fortunately for me, the 345 that I'm using for a prop in this video has the steel clamp, so I don't have to worry about that. So this whole intake I'm going to move over to this cylinder, and it ought to be a reliable setup. And what I'm going to do is take a bearing cap and basically take material off the top of the bearing cap right there until I get the squish I'm looking for, which will be 18 thousandths on this saw. And I guess actually the only thing that would require special tools is doing my muffler mods. But you know, you can get effectively the same thing by just opening up the hole here, or just adding another deflector on your muffler. You don't have to do it with this. It's just what I do. What else? The later 350s had an issue which really affected the image of that saw, and one of the reasons why people don't like working on them. And that is when they went to this 45mm cylinder that had the caps on the transfers, for whatever reason it changed the vibration characteristics, and they had a habit of rattling out the screws that hold the muffler on. When that muffler started to get loose, the exhaust gases would leak around and start burning holes in things. And there's a lot of ruined 350 cases, especially the later versions, simply because that muffler began to rattle off. Whereas you rarely see that on a 345, and you actually rarely see it on a old style 350 such as this that has the open port type cylinder. Yeah, and there's differences in air filters, but notice this one has, notice this has no such issues. I've got 3 of them right around here of the older style that don't have any issues of melting the cases. But I also have a whole pile of these 45mm 350s that in fact have melted the cases. Now, so that's just a quick overview. You might be asking why I'm pulling the crank out. The reason I pull the crank out every time is I want to clean on the inside of there quite well before I put it back together. The other thing is I also take a little material off the couple thousandths. I take a couple of thousandths off the base of these bearing caps to make sure they grab those and seal these bearings better. You know, I also get a kick sometimes of the online experts arguing over whether or not goo gaskets or 1194 style gaskets are worth doing. Well, what do you call this stuff right here that the Husqvarna engineers decided was a good enough product? You know, that's how they seal that bottom end, is with a silicone type gasket. I can guarantee you that the 1194 or 1184 product is better than whatever they used. You know? That company, 3Bond, has an interesting history, and you can look it up if you want. But if you appreciate what's happened in the Japanese automotive and motorcycle businesses, 3Bond is a company that's grown up right along with them and has been a part of that, making some of that stuff possible with their products. I'm a fan. I don't think there's anything you can buy out there that's any better, and that is a plug. You know, it may not have the name recognition because you don't see it at the local hardware store or local parts store, but from what I can see over time, when I've pulled my saws apart to do checks, when I do, you know, brick teardowns to see whether or not my builds are actually doing what they're supposed to do, the ones I've done with a 3Bond 1194, because I haven't yet pulled down an 84 saw, but the ones that had the 1194, you had to pull them apart. It was not an easy thing, and that sealer bonded to both the plastic and the metal, depending on what I use it on. And there's just no way that stuff was coming apart. It's not leaking either. I think it's a really good product. This is what's left of the few tubes that I had of that stuff. That's been replaced by this. And I honestly haven't pulled one of these apart yet. But I used to pull my test builds apart pretty frequently. And every time I use this stuff, it was a chore to break the seal. So I'm pretty convinced. And there's enough of it out there now that my speculation is turning into empirical data. So I'm just going to slap this together. And this is simply just to find out what I have for squish in this configuration before I actually get serious about putting it together. You know what I'm saying? I'm just going to assemble this piston on there with no ring like I normally do. You know, a lot of times I don't have to change anything. Just taking the base gasket out all by itself gets me in that 20 thousandths range. And if I'm below 20 thousandths on squish, well, then I just might as well put it on a lathe, take off, you know, 30 thousandths and put a gasket in there, and then work from there. So that's what this exercise is about as much as anything else. So here we go. Fine threaded bearing cap, the original crank from the 345, golf piston, good stock top end. Now I need my solder. So basically I'm exactly at 20 thousandths without the base gasket. You know, it just seems like it works out that way over and over again. Got to be careful because I don't want to get down past 15. That's not good. So as it sits right here, got 20 thousandths squish, and to this point I plugged the decomp, again open port, 44 millimeter golf piston, fine thread bearing cap. Going to keep the priming bulb and all that. I'm going to use a stock carburetor. So I guess at this point it's just just clean up the bearing cap and get this damn thing back together again. Couple things is I did put a little 1194 inside that boot because I'm chicken, and I dropped a little bit of oil on the bearings and on the wrist pin bearing before I put that together. And now I'm going to glue this cylinder on. Just figured I'd do a little bit of chat. And also put 1194 all on the bottom. I shot some pictures. And also put it on the bolts before I put them in. So there's a lot of this 3-bond. I guess it's 1184. It's the new stuff. So gonna put the cylinder together and go eat dinner. Yeah, I cheat. I very loosely put on a vice grip, not enough to bend that fin or even mark it, just enough to hold it so I can push the cylinder down. A cheat. You know, I kind of dab it on with my fingers, just sort of dot it on like that and make sure it sticks. Because if it does not stick, you got to take it off and do it again. Because you got to make sure there's a bond between this gasket material and the aluminum. You know, put it on both sides. And I kind of watch it. I watch to see if it draws away from areas. That means it didn't bond there. I'll go back and dab it again. So. Well, I was shooting for 18 thousandths. Pretty damn close, huh? Should be a good running saw. Well, I got it together. It runs pretty nice. Spring assist start and all. I ran a couple of test cuts. The chain's whooped. But you know, it's one of those things, best laid plans of mice and men. I was going to use that saw right there for a control. It won't start. Got plenty of gas, plenty of spark, so it's got to be compression. So I guess I'll do a little aside and put the camera on the stand and fire this thing up so you can fire this one up where we can see it run. And then take that one right there and break it right down in a hurry as best I can. So anyway, let me fire this one off first. We go from summer to fall and to winter, and so far it's been a pretty mild fall for us. You know, we haven't had any snowfall or anything like that. But today I've got two 345s. One you've seen go through a transformation on video already, and the other, the subject of this video, actually got a 350 open port top end. Nothing really, you know, special. Nothing terribly special. And this one had the closed port top end. The big difference between these two saws is the open versus closed port top end. And on the fugly saw right there, I actually increased the intake duration quite a bit. Didn't do much to the other ports, but the intake has been modified quite a bit. And this one here is stock. There's no change to the cylinder whatsoever, other than a no base gasket build. So they've got the same chain on them, and they both have some wear, so they're roughly equal in terms of sharpness. And I have no time on this 345 closest to us, so I really haven't got it broke in yet. So part of what we're doing today is I want to get some time on the saw, and I also want to get some times on the two builds, so there's a quantitative difference between the open versus closed port builds. And I think that's actually a fair comparison right there. This one also has a spring assist start. more RPMs, huh? All right, how about another shot with this one? And this time I took the high-speed screw and turned it in about 1/8 of a turn. Not happy with it. I guess I'm gonna go back and tear it apart and see what's going on. I don't like the way it changes its tune. Well, you may have been able to surmise from my comments at the end of yesterday, I wasn't particularly pleased with the way that saw turned out. Not a power thing. I was chasing the tune that whole afternoon. You know, add a little fuel, take it back away, just very inconsistent from hour to hour. So, you know, fearing the worst, I started checking things like vacuum and those type of things, and the bottom end held vacuum. So it wasn't the bottom end, wasn't the cylinder, wasn't the cylinder seal. So that leaves things like, you know, spark plug or stupid things. And what I think it was the carburetor, because I pulled the carburetor off another 350, you know, one of the later model 350s that had the purge circuit in there, put it on, it seems to run better. So I'm going to fire it up and do some work and see if it can stay consistent under a little bit heavier workload than what I did up at the house. So, and this should be the end of the video, and hopefully at the end of this I feel comfortable that I can hand it off. Yep, I can tell you right now it's a lot better than it was. So I now feel comfortable with that saw. So where did it end up? That's kind of curious. I'm going to do a plug check on it and run the tack on it and see how it ended up. That's a really safe number. A little bit low in RPMs, but you know something? For the application, it's not bad. I'm going to go run it. I'm going to go run it off camera for a second and get the RPMs, or get it really hot, and then do a plug check on it. Just hit a tap. Frick. Ruin that chain. So I should have left good enough alone, but at least I'll get my plug check. Plug says it's running pretty good. I could lean it out a little bit. You know, that chocolate brown color is kind of what you're looking for reliability. I could lighten it up and make it tan and it'd be happy, you know. But with a particular customer in mind, I'm going to leave it rich. You know why? Because we're going into winter. And then come December, when he's out there and it's 10 degrees outside, or January, it'll be about right. It's a conservative tune, and I'm going to leave it just that way. Let me see if that cut changed its base tune at all. Getting it that hot, you know. Yeah, I overanalyze everything. But you know something? I'd rather overanalyze and have you guys laugh than have him come back pissed off. I like it. Now I gotta get the guy a new chain. Let's see how bad I dinged it. Damn, I just sharpened that chain too. I think that's enough for the day. Go down and make a couple hot dogs. Yep, it's gonna be hunting season. Actually, it's gonna be hunting season in about a week. So you hear guys practicing already. You know, the first day of hunting season around here, it sounds like a war zone. Every time you do a build like this, you got to ask yourself, well, what did you learn? And I relearned a couple of lessons. And it seems like I got to keep relearning them over and over again. First one is maple taps do bad things to chains. But that's just what I have for wood. I like hot dogs. Well, I don't have to relearn that. I think the big one on this saw is you got to tinker with these builds, and sometimes it's not quite as easy as you want it to be, because the problem that you're having to solve isn't as simple as you want it to be. Well, simple to find. And in this particular case, it was the carburetor. And the carburetor actually looked brand new. I mean, it didn't look like it had a whole lot of time at all. But I wasn't getting consistent results with it. And finally replaced it with a different carburetor, and the saw runs great. Now, I set the tune at 12,500 RPMs because it's a warm day and we're going into winter. And I suspect that we drop from 50 degrees, high 40s, down into the 20s and teens. That saw is going to be up around 12.8, close to 12.9. And 13 is about as fast as you want to turn one of those open port cylinders. I don't really see any sense in going any faster than that unless it's been ported, and it has not been ported. Just lean it out too much and end up sticking it just for what? For more RPMs? It runs good, has good torque. It runs a whole lot stronger than it did. It's a good running saw.